mushroom ceremony?
Well,
Wait, no.
In whatever, I don't know. It was like something that you did and she did.
Oh, the DMT?
And I was like, if you want to like witness someone experiencing stigmata, just
What's stigmata?
when you experience the wounds of Christ on your palms.
Yeah, you would be that person. Alana does not get psychedelics. Alana is on psychedelics every moment of the day. Oh, you want me to clap? Can that mic stand go lower, Tim?
It would like give a whole new meaning to the red tent.
Yeah. I'm just going to move it back a little bit.
Yeah.
And so you probably know what these microphones have to be pretty close.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
This. Yeah, but you talk softly. It's right beside the computer. Okay, let's do a little smudge.
Okay.
Okay, this is recording. See you later. Have fun. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Can you shut the door just in case people walk up? Even lock it. Can you turn the lock?
Yep.
Thanks.
I can take this out.
Oh yeah, good idea. Thanks. Thanks.
Not this one, right?
No, leave that one there. Thanks, love. Okay. Make sure. Yeah.
This is like way more like effort than Between Two Ferns. Do you remember that?
No.
Do you remember? You don't? No. What was it? Zach, what's his name? Galifianakis, whatever his last name was. He had this, it was like a comedy show and like Barack Obama was on it.
Oh,
and
no, I
Portman.
hadn't heard of this.
It was called Between Two Ferns and it was like these fake ferns
Oh.
that were like sort of badly and like cheesy chairs
I
and
see.
like ask them
So
really confrontational questions. And
So this looks a little bit better,
this
hey?
is way better.
Okay, so let's smudge together.
Okay.
So with the intention of coming together in conversation and learning about your art and creativity and your process and your current works and getting in flow together. Is there anything you want to add?
I'm good. That was nice.
It's such a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah.
You inspire me so deeply. I'll gush about that later.
Unhook. Unhook from the yard,
The garden,
the homeschooling,
the children, the weekend.
weekend.
I don't know if we can ever unhook from the children.
No. Well, like there's always that horde, but I'm good. They're at a different age. Mine are, yeah. It just gets different.
A different kind of.
Yeah. Ooh, I like the tattoos.
Have you not seen them?
No. Yeah.
All right. Feels good.
So do you turn it on or is it on?
It's already on. Oh, wow. Yeah, he turns it on and leaves, you know?
Right. Amazing. That's a good man.
I think so. I'll keep him for as long as, I'll borrow him for as long as I can.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for being here today. I so Alana Levandoski. Is that how you say it? Levandoski?
Levandoski.
Levandoski.
Yeah. It would be Alana Levandowska if it hadn't been anglicized at Ellis Island.
Yeah.
So it means from the place where lavender grows.
Oh my gosh. That's beautiful.
So ska is the feminine and the ski means from. So that's why you hear so many skis around, like any.
Is that Polish?
It's Polish, and I think I'm not sure, but you see it in some Ukrainian surnames as well.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, right there, I have so much to say, but I want to talk about Ellis Island, and I think that this kind of like moves into some of the work that you've been creating. But before that, I just want to speak to, I would say like that we know each other because we were living in the same community of Onanol, and I knew about you first by actually falling in love with the house you were selling. That I it wasn't in a place to purchase it, but it was interesting to me because when you guys had put your house up for sale, I was like, this space is so perfect for us because it has a studio and and I was like, this is the best property. And then of course, when I met you and your family, it was like, no wonder I fell in love with that house and the way that space was designed, because you guys are artists and creators and, unschoolers, homeschoolers. And at that point, you guys were making a leap to a different community, but with a purpose, right? Like there was a reason why you were selling your house that kind of leads into, what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, and actually moving back home, really, because I grew up in the area that we now live. But it was a 12-year journey as artists, putting in sweat equity into different projects to get to the point where none of our art wasn't going to be driven, like my music wasn't going to be driven by the wolves at the door.
Yeah.
So, and that means that you sometimes revise different aspects of what it's going to look like. So now I have my separate studio from our house, and we live in, it's a potato chip container that's 12 by 60 by 11 and a half. And we turned it into this beautiful home. And that's kind of like the vision that we had, was to, rather than try and hold this big vision, we had to kind of like narrow it down, separate a few pieces, and then find out that we could function a lot more in that way. So
yeah, in the smaller separate spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool. I just recently have been there and seeing, what you did with a potato chip container.
Yeah.
You and Ian, and the studio being separate, and the land that you're on, and knowing that you're, back home, and that you guys, made that journey with a lot of intention. And like you said, to not be operating by the wolves at the door.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've been songwriting forever, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, so like to go way back, always. I'm sure you know what that feels like. I remember like hearing these vinyl records of my mom's and like dressing up like a hippie and twirling around like with their old clothes and twirling around to like Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young's Deja Vu. And but I also that, like, Bob Dylan, those great songwriter types. But also my grandma had vinyl. And so I was really drawn, like as a 6-year-old, to Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and my grandma had a Wilf Carter vinyl record, and it's like 2-minute genius, the most simple genius country songs that you'll ever find. Just the most like 2-chord simple songs that tell a complete story, that strike at your heart in a way that's just really simple. And yeah, so I was really drawn to that, which is what took me on this journey of like my former genre of roots and alt country music that took me around the world, signed me to Rounder Records, all these different things that happened to me through always like being drawn to the craft of songwriting. Like I ended up writing in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, which is, you know, an extraordinary hotbed for some of the best Americana rock music that ever was, including those Rolling Stones recorded Exile on Main Street there. I got to sing into the microphone in the same little, like in the same booth that Aretha Franklin recorded I Ain't Never Loved a Man. Like that place is like a humble, everybody's so nice, like, but it's this humbled out space, but all of this great richness came out of it. So I got to go down there a lot back in those days. Nashville, Los Angeles, like all these different places of co-writing and developing the craft. So that I'm really grateful that I got to do that.
So you were deep in the music industry, like on
Yeah.
tour.
Big
So you
time.
were signed to a record label at one point.
I was signed to Rounder Records, which is the big roots music label. It's out of Boston. And then my second album, I was distributed by EMI. And that album was produced by Coldplay's producer Ken Nelson, who had very recently won all the Grammys for Parachutes and Rush of Blood to the Head and those great albums. And he actually flew to, and we recorded half of it in the town that I live in, Kelwood, in the little Anglican church there, and then half of it at Parr Street Studios in Liverpool. And I was staying with some friends on Penny Lane, like hello. And anyway, got to on that album, I played the same piano in the same space that all of those songs were recorded, like Parachutes and Rush of Blood to the Head.
Wow.
So the ba-da-da, ba-da-da, ba. So whenever I'm like, I remember when my kids were really little and I was pushing the cart around shopping, grocery shopping, I'd hear that and I go, mm-hmm.
I was there one day.
Yeah. Just my little secret.
Yeah. Well, you know, you've never, I've never heard that actually. I mean, you amaze me. And your journey is really fascinating because, you know, you were in that world, and you were touring and you were living that, you know, quote unquote artist's dream, you know, sitting from this chair, that was always held as like the goal, the dream.
Yeah.
And yet now you're doing something totally different. Can you speak to, you know, what kind of led to that shift, maybe out of that lifestyle into this place that you are now?
So it took an immense, in my case, I mean, in the modern world, we don't initiate we don't get initiated. We don't do rites of passage. We don't. So, you know, traditionally throughout the world, around the world, this is a universal, we in our villages constructed a crisis for our youth to go through, like almost like a managed crisis that sent you out of the village and into the woods, into nature,
Right.
to kind of go through marking a transition.
Yes.
So we don't do those types of things. So they show up now in various ways. Divorce being, I think, it's the number one rite of passage in the modern world. and also falling off the ladder that's up against the wrong wall.
Right.
People say when they say I had to climb down the ladder that's up, I fell off the ladder and crashed with like a bloody, it was just, so like, I remember, sometimes the way I'll describe it is that people joke, the joke of what happens when you play a country song backwards. You get your dog back, you get your wife back,
Right.
you get all. So mine was the country song played forwards, like for a long stretch of time of just immense personal loss. And then through that experience, I was able to have a sort of out-of-body visual of my life and realize that I wasn't happy. Like I was like in this, and there was a moment that I'll never forget where I was standing on a Hollywood rooftop with a pool, and I could see the sign, like the Hollywood sign, and there were very, very powerful men standing on either side of me, very powerful. One of them is gone now. But it was at that moment where, looking back, I knew I was leaving, but I just didn't know. And then I was sort of like, they say it takes like 2 or 3 years for you to leave something that like isn't serving or...
Yes.
Well, it didn't take that long because my personal life just fell completely apart. So it gave me the opportunity to just like let it go. And so then I found myself eventually like unwinding contracts, unwinding all sorts of things like legalities, and hiding out at a Benedictine monastery.
Wow. Okay. So you were bound in some ways to some of these things. You had to like legally
Yep.
get out of the contract. So that was
Yep.
like a life in some ways that you were, I don't want to say stuck, because obviously you weren't, but it
No.
was like there was limitations. There wasn't a lot of freedom at that point, or...
Well, it was more like I had built this, and then I had to, like, I had built it, then I had fallen off the ladder,
Yeah.
and, sort of bloodied and mangled and tired, I went about doing some of the necessary things that would need to happen in order to, unhook. But it was interesting because that the other thing we don't have in, modern culture is language for downtimes.
Yes.
And so the great gift of what I received when I was in the monastery, which by the way was amazing,
How long were you there?
just under half a year.
Wow. You were there for almost 6 months.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was volunteering, so I worked 4 hours a day. And I was doing a lot of the groundwork because some of these ladies are, getting older. And so I was doing like physical labor, which I needed to do because I was going through so much loss. Whenever you're going through that, you need to, I find anyone I've ever spoken to, they like start running marathons. They start doing different things just to be in their body and not
Yeah.
in the excruciating,
Freeze.
feeling of the loss.
Yeah.
So anyway, some of these women were like hilarious. Like I remember one, she was probably pushing 90, and this young priest showed up, and he wasn't, he hadn't been born in Canada. He had a different, cultural look on men and women and roles and different things like that. And also inside of the history of this establishment, there's also that, right?
Right.
And so he brought his laundry. And this spitfire of a sister says to him, that's half the reason I got into this racket. So I didn't have to wash a man's socks, right? So there's some humor there, right? She's not saying that's the only reason she got in. Like, there's nuance to all this humor and kind of like clever trickster energy inside of that space that people wouldn't imagine is there.
Right.
And the rhythm of chanting the Psalms and the rhythm of the silences. And I was in a cell or like a little room next to the monastic library, not the retreat center library. So I was able to, and no one else was down that hall. I was just me and this like an illuminated manuscripts and then some of the great this stream of the Western mysteries was in that room, including language for dissent. And a friend gave me a book called The Solace of Fierce Landscapes, and it addressed this very thing, the sort of illuminated darkness, or what St. John of the Cross, the dark night of the soul.
Right.
And that's where that comes from. And so I had all this language suddenly for what was happening. And I was like, this is really the first time I've ever experienced this language.
Right.
There's like, it's this treasure trove, and where is it in the culture? Where is it in? So
this was, you said it was Benedictine, or
Yeah.
And so that's Christian?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's Catholic.
It's Catholic. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you were in a Catholic monastery, primarily of women.
Yeah.
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 I want to say, like, knowing you for, the amount that I have gotten to know you so far, I get when you talk about being in the cell beside the library.
Yeah.
It feels like exactly like when I think about you and the work that you do and the way that you songwrite and the way that you write and the way that you speak. I mean, it's like, I just imagine you literally sleeping at nighttime and all of that just like flooding into your psyche. It just be, your psyche. And
they were like some of these mystics were there, not just the books themselves. It was a very powerful encounter with a stream that most people don't know about in modern culture, that is connected to the roots of, if you come from, especially from a European background, this is a 1,600-year-old tradition that influenced, in a good way, actually, much of the. It's a funny thing because there's the state side of things that we know. Lots of people don't even know the history of how this organization came to be and how the canons were hammered out and all of this, the state religion came to be. That's one of my specialties, but that's another conversation. But all that to say that as we critique, we'll find this anywhere, as we critique power, as we critique organizations, what we have to learn now is nuance, because we're at a moment in the history of the planet where treasure troves will be buried if we do not open to the fact that some of it's going to come through a stream that we struggle with.
Right.
Because, and you'll get there anywhere you go, because the celibate power structures that come from both East and West, if you really look at it without romanticizing something that you feel isn't, you'll realize that the way these building blocks were built at certain times within certain patriarchal cultural expressions, then you have to kind of go in there and, rather than just throwing everything out, look at it with curiosity.
Yeah.
Because there's mysteries there and women there as well that will be buried if you just
write it off because say
wash
it's
your hands of it.
Christian or because it's Catholic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think this applies, as you're alluding to various things. And you and I have had the conversation off microphone around this idea of holding the nuance, right? Of like, you just said it actually was a good thing, as you're speaking about, like those mysteries, the Catholic, teachings. Am I right? That's what
Yeah. I mean, the Benedictine way of life
right.
is like it's a rhythm of life that and it's a mystery that is right now at the risk of being buried,
Right.
partly because of the celibate power structure that's still at play
What do you mean by the celibate power structure?
inside of the Catholic
Yes,
Church.
okay.
There is a power structure that was built in a long time ago and still exists. And again, I want to say that I don't want to betray compassion. I have some of my favorite people are, and my teachers are within Franciscan, Benedictine, Trappist
Yeah.
communities.
Yes.
And so what I will say to that is that there's wisdom there.
Yes.
And formation there that we don't have.
Yeah.
And something that I've struggled with all along in my journey is, even when I was an alt country singer, because this has never ever not been here for me,
Yeah.
is how do I'm almost like a bee in the bonnet, and that I know other people who are as well, because we know there are keys held, keys to the mysteries. Not all of them, but some of them are held there.
Yes.
And so what's happening right now is that the real estate, literally the real estate, is being it kind of looks like it's like we're all dying. We're just dying to ourselves. But I think what's happening is there's an unwillingness to look at what could be, what could change, what could open, and how those keys could be offer formation to people, because there's wisdom there.
Yeah.
Like in the West that goes all the way back. I mean, it goes all the way back to Egypt. It goes all the way back to like whether or not it's a myth or a reality, Atlantis. It is a deep, deep, deep dive.
Right. They're not separate. And I think this is the thing. And because there was so much dogma and, war and violence and, created or acted within, that, let's say, celibate power structure and the state, that you're right. We're so quick, or people tend to be so quick to just write off like, okay. And it seems like in a way it's kind of a trauma response that we have for those of us that are, of European descent or, where we don't really want to identify with those roots. But one of the things that I think about in that is like, okay, if we were to be like, no, that's not good, that's not wise, that was like a really patriarchal society and it was violent and we just kind of, push it aside and get really dogmatic about that in our own way. We're kind of saying that our ancestors and that us before us are kind of stupid and they're not wise, that's kind of where we're leading to underneath it, because it's like, there's no way that there's not wisdom there. There's no way that there's not gold in those treasure chests. Of course, as we are evolving in our consciousness and we see now, like there was ways in which that maybe that wisdom was kept away from us, or the ways that wisdom was withheld or even used under the state. But this nuance that you speak to, it's like we need to actually be able to see it all, not just the violence, not just the pain. We need to be able to hold the dark and the light. of life, if that's a simple way of saying it. And when you were talking about like the descent, is that what you called it? The descent, would that be similar to like shadow work? I think that a lot of people are using those terms now,
Yeah,
like
you
going
could say
dark
that.
night of the soul, like doing shadow work.
It's not ascent.
That's right.
It's like there's a point, and you can't contrive it. Like it comes. The only way it can be created is this is the other thing that when we were in Europe, and like we went to Poland, to the ancestral lands my great grandparents. We went to the Highlands of Scotland in the West Country of England, and I also, that was like the sort of my relatives, my like grandparents, but then I also was doing really deep work, spiritual ancestors, because some of my favorite, like Hilda of Whitby is from Britain. Some of the great saints, Columba, and again, there's stories that conflict, and we try, and when we approach anyone, any person throughout history through puritanical eyes, you have to erase them, pretty much.
Right.
Because everyone was influenced by their culture, and everyone was in some way imperfect.
Right.
And so I just chose not to approach any of this from like a neo-puritanical way, which I have experienced a lot. Like I've looked at the world through those eyes.
Right. Okay, so neo-puritanical, I love that. And so there's so many threads that I want to speak to in this, but would you say that is a phenomena that's happening a lot right now?
Yeah, I would.
Yeah. Like in this like woke, and I say in quotes, but like this like, being very critical, being like whenever someone is expresses some sort of human quality, they're canceled.
Yeah, I would be careful with that as well, because the history of that word, the woke word,
yeah,
the history of that word comes from a very legitimate place of Black women in America.
Oh, tell me more.
I don't know. I'm not the expert. I think that there's a lot of information on that word that's being taught by Black women.
Okay.
But what I would say is that it's a catch-all now.
It is.
But what I would say in terms of, I almost don't want to use the word and put it over here and then look at neo-Puritanism.
Okay, I like it. Let's do it.
Because I think that if you look at the history of puritanical expressions throughout history, you're going to find similar behaviors. Mm-hmm. And you'll always find that it's the arts and culture state of consciousness is very compromised because we try to get at things directly.
Yes.
We try to nail it down directly, and anything that we're dealing with on that level has to be almost told in slant. Like that's why we have in my tradition parables, like these different things where you look at something and you tell it in slant. You work with like delivery systems that have nuance, that have like that actually are beautiful.
Right.
And when you just nail something head on, there's a limitation to the kind of beauty that can come out of it. So and a part of it comes from our unwillingness to like spend even a second in discomfort. Mm-hmm. Right. So if you spend more time and practice sitting more with discomfort for longer stretches of time, a constriction shows up, which really is where art is produced.
You're brilliant. Yes. No, you're fucking brilliant. It's true. You're right. And so it's like, it feels like right now we're at a place where sitting with discomfort is something that we're struggling with on the mass, right?
Which causes a lot of distrust.
Uh-huh.
Like our level, our capacity to trust each other has like narrowed. And I think when you eliminate the delivery systems for beauty, you will always end up in a place where you're eyeing someone as though do they have like 9 heads? Are they a monster? Are they like, so you really never can, like, it's almost like a coalescence becomes less possible because you're trying to hit everything head on, when in fact the reason why we have this state of consciousness where you can make like make things like art and poetry and just all the arts, really. These forms of expression, it gets really narrowed and compromised. And so anyway, I'm definitely like trying to just not dwell on the fact that we're doing this. We're like, hardening our hearts or becoming stony, less fleshy toward each other, and trying to be enfleshed, like just really fleshy in the way that I make things.
Yes.
Because somebody has to do it. There's other people that are doing it. And the more we have conversations about it, like, what is it? What's like, why am I feeling that this just doesn't feel quite right? At a certain point, even I've written protest songs before, right? Even a protest song, if you are not sitting in that place of nuance, and you treat it like it's an agenda, it is propaganda.
Right.
Even if what you have to say is important. And so I've worked with people before when they want to write a song that it raises awareness about something. And I say, how can everyone fall in love with that lake or that whatever it is that you're trying to protect? And how do we not demonize, and how do we turn it into something that, like, by the end of it, everybody is like, oh my God, what if that was lost?
Yes.
Right?
Okay. Yeah. And so as you're speaking, I mean, one of the things, and you're alluding to this, is that when we're sitting in that creative consciousness, right? And I'm just going to name it that because that feels easy to access right now. It's like we're doing things, delivering things in a way to help us embody. I believe art is an embodiment. It's an experience, right? And so we can, as you're speaking about, like, how do you make someone fall in love with that lake? It's like, how do we make people feel it in their bodies, not just cerebrally, right? And then you think about propaganda versus like...
That's right. Propaganda is a cerebral event.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Whereas like these delivery systems that we have, like through poetry, through songwriting, through music, through parable, through, it's like they can help bypass that rational space and bring us into our emotive space. And then we can actually access each other and feel empathy and feel compassion and open up our own consciousness. And so, when art is suffering, as you're speaking to, when we're in a place where we're feeling like, or people just aren't creating art in this way because of maybe where we're at in our evolution, and we're very stuck in this dualistic, I think, way of thinking, like black or white, or like you can't create art like that because that supports this, and you're whatever, you get it. So when we're not holding the nuance, let's say, and you spoke to this when we were sitting in your studio, it's like propaganda, or it's like not the art we need. It's like we need to create the art that we need.
Well, and you have to, in order to do that, the discomfort will come. So you have to sit long enough with it, because the other thing is that I think that how I make art is that it is a spiritual act. Like, yes. I because it is like a coalescence to the invisible realm as well. And so the invisible realm, to even sense it for a moment, you can't not love that forest anymore. Like, to sense it for a moment, to know how much you're connected to everything, to know, to have that glimpse of, or a flash of that, it pierces the heart, right? It's like a flaming arrow to the heart.
Yes.
To see the unspirited nature of the universe.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I'm not saying that everyone has to make art that points to that, but in some way, just the enactment of the art itself is participating in an invisible, like, it's like working in the visible realm and bringing in the invisible realm.
Yes.
So that's also part of it. So it's a heart space, but what is the heart space, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think about, like, even when you're experiencing art, so even if you're not the artist, but you're experiencing somebody create that art, being the vessel, right? That brings, that moment, that connection to the unspirited. Did you call it the unspirited realm?
The inspirited.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes more sense. The inspirited realm. There's like a weaving that happens, like in the participation of that. As you receive that experience, that at least my experience has been that then you become interwoven in that current moment, in that space. And so, even a glimpse of that, and you can see this for people that create a variety of different arts, and they might not even go in with the intention of, like, I'm, connecting to the muse, or I'm connecting to the inspirited realm, but like, it happens when you can be that vessel. And then when you can bring that into a space with others, man, like, I don't think there's anything better. And, personally.
Yeah, because it's really in that constriction. Like, there's some, whatever you want to call it, you don't have to call it a mystery, but inside that constriction is where an alchemical process will happen.
That's right.
And you don't get that when you have a straight up agenda. You have to, like,
Yes.
I made an album that tells the story of the Trappist monk, Thomas Merton, who's one of the great Catholic intellectuals in the history of the 20th century. He on that album, the Dalai Lama, I had got permission for his voice to be on the album as well. And he called Thomas Merton a very strong bridge between the Catholic tradition and the Buddhist tradition. And so the interfaith dialogue, the history of interfaith dialogue is really connected to these people, and including Thich Nhat Hanh and Merton and the Dalai Lama, who was a young man, and Merton was older than him. So there's this picture that when I get when the Dalai Lama's voice shows up on my album, it's actually a moment when he's looking at a picture of him and Thomas Merton, and he says he almost looks like he could be my father, but they did an extraordinary amount of work for interfaith dialogue, but also Merton worked with awakening the Western mysteries in a big way. So he showed up when I was living in the monastery.
So was that album written and created after the monastery?
Oh yeah.
So there was a shift then? That's when there was also a shift in your music.
So for 10 years, I have made music that works in that very narrow niche of raising telling stories and making art inside of that particular tradition. But it's very different than what a lot of people experience when they think of like
spiritual music, religious music, Christian,
like it's not.
No.
That's actually not what it is. But this album was I had a stack of his books, and I worked especially with a book called The Intimate Merton, where it's just a bunch of his journals, and I tell his life story with a fellow named James Finley who does spoken word, and he was a novice. They call him like a student of Thomas Merton's.
And he was on the album?
And James Finley's on the album, and Merton's voice is on the album, and the Dalai Lama. Now, what I was going to say about that, so I had to give context of my connection to him and who he was. But he said, and this was in reference to the process of art, that everyone wants the Red Sea to part, this metaphor. But the problem is you have to be in over your head before it will. And that is the trust process that we are not willing to engage in right now. And I think we have a huge trust problem in general.
Right.
We don't trust the process of art anymore.
Right.
So,
or ourselves. I just want to say, because I think even, as a counselor, I mean, for me, it's the same, right? The process of creating something and the process of alchemy within ourselves.
Yeah.
Right. It feels like it has a very similar process, and people are so scared to be in discomfort. In fact, that's usually why they come to see me, is like, okay, I want to be fixed. I want to fix myself so I don't actually have to be uncomfortable. And I, eventually get to a place where we're laughing, and it's like, no, like that counseling is about actually getting the tools to be uncomfortable. Like, you don't come here, here to try to be outside of your discomfort or be outside of your body. Actually, part of this alchemy is coming into your body and learning how to feel the pain of being human and learn how to alchemize that pain into something. And for me, it's always been art, but for other people, it might be something else, right?
Yeah.
But that is, and so it's like, I feel like there's a not trusting each other, which, I mean, it's like inward and outward, right? So it's like not trusting each other, not trusting our own capacity. And sometimes I wonder about that being, because it seems like we're really stuck in this kind of victim consciousness. Right. And I don't want to overuse that, but like this really disempowered place that like, I can't do it. I'm unsafe. I can't trust others. I'm not strong enough. So much has happened to me, and anyways, I don't want to go too on a tangent.
Yeah. And I wonder too about, I'll just speak to the West in particular.
Yeah.
They're like, it's interesting. I like to look at from different perspectives, like the Southern Hemisphere's perspective of the West, or just to get out of, but I will speak to it because it's my experience, right? And it's my lineage, and what I'm seeing, culturally speaking, I think that this is a Western problem, is what we're talking about.
Yes.
So I'm going to speak to it in that way because of that.
Yes, thank you.
I think that also we have lost our stories.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to get into this.
Okay, so we've lost our stories. We're not carrying the stories. We didn't tell the new stories. A part of the process of Ellis Island was to eliminate difference.
Just speak briefly to Ellis Island for the listeners.
So it's a process of eliminating difference and creating difference all at the same time. So in the 1920s, basically the way people were sorted when they came off the boats was based on a dictionary of race. It makes me, anybody who's never heard this before, it could make them feel a little bit sick. Yeah. So just beware. But, and the dictionary changed according to the pseudoscience of the time of eugenics. But really what it was how do we populate the machine in different ways?
Meaning like Canada, like what we know to be Canada.
And it was the United States, but it was, and then up into Canada. So at the time, like there was a huge Polish population in Buffalo, and then they were given a little piece of land and a sack of flour, and a pig up in, around here. And that's my family's story, right, on my dad's side. And so at one point, though, Eastern Europeans were not considered to be white. So it was like, and then slowly but surely all these different, like the Bulgarians, and then all the way into even Middle East, they started to change and sort people in different ways to populate the workforce, basically, of the country in different ways. Really, so, I'm sorry to say, so that we wouldn't all get together. All the different colors of people
Right.
and different backgrounds and cultures of people wouldn't get together with our differences and say, this is how it's going to be.
Right. We're not going to follow the rules and populate and create this machine, this country. And so what it looked like, okay, so Ukrainian people, you go here and you farm. Was it like that? Or
a
like
little bit, but it was actually far more about assimilation.
Okay.
So blend in, like the European people were supposed to blend in. So that's where you get this homogenization and this weird term Caucasian, which is really just one little area,
Right.
like this little mountainous region. It's just the weirdest thing. So I've been doing kind of looking at this part of the story as well, but not just that part of the story. Also the spiritual side of things, the religious side of things, because what a lot of people don't have compassion for is that when you lose your regalia and you have a history of losing your language, which almost, you go up into the West Highlands. When I was in Poland, my Kashubian ancestors just in the last 15 years got their Kashubian language on the signage and had to fight for it, and all this stories of that. When that happens, one of the things that you will cling to is some form of common identity, which was a church.
Right.
And you had songs, you had ritual, you had something that congealed your community together. And so that's another thing that we're forgetting about, the sort of basic, like just the grassroots, salt of the earth people that just had something, at least, to identify with, when everything else had been really just sort of like, ironed out, taken out, like that sort of thing. So we've seen where the whole entire storyline was that. Like it really was that.
Like a loss of story, a loss of culture, a loss of spirituality and practice.
Yeah. And there's a woundedness there.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a, I don't even know where to start kind of woundedness.
Right. And I can feel it.
Which is really what woundedness is.
Right. And, as you said, this isn't the first time that you've spoken to me about this, and I still feel it. It's like there's an emergence of like tears wanting to come, thinking about, like the people that came into and settled these areas in our families. And I mean, we haven't even spoken about the impact of that on the Indigenous people here.
That's right, which is the other research piece of nativism. The difference between learning to be from a place, which is what really was being asked of all the people who came, to be really from a place and not to see it as a place that as just a resource but nativism is different than being from a place. Nativism is it's a power over ownership identity. And so on this folk opera album that I'm releasing under a new name.
And what's the new name?
Mediatrix.
You were going to release it under Mediatrix.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have the work that I've been doing kind of in this niche of like Hermeticism, Christian mysticism, still going, but some of the songs that I feel belong in that kind of arts and culture sector, like more on the surface of, like in this, not in these way out there depths of whatever. I want to be able to dialogue. They belong in a different spot.
Yeah, this is really cool, actually, now that you're explaining this more. And I know I've been following this on social media, but because what you're doing right now, this album, what you're speaking to, and we'll keep talking about, you know, as you're talking about the loss of story and then the reclamation of, I think, your story. But this is actually very hot right now, you know, and very much in the forefront of, I would say, common, I don't even want to say, like, what do I name it? It's like it's just in the zeitgeist right now. Yeah. This like spirituality, the understand the ancestral wounding, the connection with our ancestors, connection with earth. I mean, I'm being called as well to create in this area as you are. And this is very important, and sort of separate it from, you know, this other very nuanced work that you have. And that can sometimes get labeled into this like Christian.
Or just people will make assumptions about it and like not know the difference between one thing and another. And that's fair, because if they're not in the tradition, to know what's the difference between something and another thing it's a difficult thing to do. But all that to say is that I love to hang out and have those conversations with a lot, like there's, and I have enormous gratitude to my teachers from that tradition as well. And I stand in a lineage, and everything I make comes from a lineage, but it doesn't mean that I don't have something to say that can participate in more the arts and culture space, as opposed to just, you know, so.
And I would say, sorry to just say, like a little bit more accessible. And I say that with love and care, but like it's like when you bring it into that other space, it's very accessible for people that aren't, you know, in this nuanced space with you. Even though it's brilliant and very important work, it's just very exciting to hear you separate that out and make this something on its own.
And that's a part of the process of, like, I worked and I toured 20 countries multiple times for 10 years, signed to record labels and all that story we began with. Then for 10 years, it started in hiding out at a monastery. And for 10 years, I sought my teachers and I reconciled with a whole hell of a lot of many, many different things that we won't get into, but partly are getting into. And now it's 20 years since I've done all of that. And I stand as a professional songwriter for 25 years.
Yeah. And an amazing one.
And thank you. And, to kind of like own that as well, which is something I think, especially women, we're not invited into a healthy swagger of our, like, and I'm talking like a mature one, like not a compensating one, but to stand in, even quietly, in what you've done, like your body of work, your whatever it is. And so to come out back into a more accessible space with all of that behind me feels like I'm not going to be climbing a ladder that's up against the wrong wall, because I'm so like, I'm just in myself now. And I wasn't, going through your 20s, you meet all the heroes, you like everybody, like, and you're behind the scenes, and you at certain points in that process, you, especially in those days, and maybe still, I'm not sure, your yes or your no to oblivion knocking on your door at 2 a.m. when they wield power.
Right.
When your yes or your no can cost you your career, which is what I faced for 10 years,
Wow.
And so that's a healing process to go through, to let go of that not being the only way, but also now to know that I'm not in a place of having sworn off of it either.
Yeah.
Like
it's a choice now.
Yeah. I walk in amnesty now. Like it's like the shard has been removed and I'm like in a different place. But, so all that to say that, the other piece is that having gone back to these lands, getting back to that, they're like, there's a story of like, being on the Hebridean Islands, over a third of the community was gone like that. And so they have stories too. And they have amnesia about their own history as well. It's not just the people who came here. In fact, some of the places here, depending on how many people came together, had a little bit more of a chance to have a memory of their culture.
Yeah.
Whereas back there was also assimilation that was taking place. Why do you think it all overflowed? And like, you know, so it's just really interesting to I don't have, the project, this folk opera that I made that I'm releasing under this more public name, it doesn't just, it's not hauntology, like it's not just this sort of like nostalgia for a time that like we think was, but really everybody's struggling. You know, when the Polish and Kashubian ancestors came here back there, you know, what was happening? They were being put on trains and taken to Siberia, you know, because of Stalin. Like all these different stories are taking place, and it opens us up to remembering that although we can look at our stories, then we can open and go, everyone's got a story, and everyone, you know, in this age that we've been going through. And so I went to a pilgrimage by myself on this trip to a place called St. Ninian's Cave. And it's a place where St. Ninian in like the early 4th century was like lived as a hermit, basically. And he is responsible in many ways for Christianizing much of Scotland. They call it the birthplace of Christianity in Scotland. And I wasn't going there just to pilgrimage to my like, you know, destination spot of my tradition. I was going there because we've got pain in that we're not touching in this story of how that particular dispensation superseded the previous one. And I went and sat there really just to ask but also to hold a coalescence between these dispensations to see if we can't find a way to name things and also make peace at the same time. Because there's wounds way back there that are a trajectory of what we're seeing today. Yeah. And so I went and sat in the cave, and what I got, there was a lot, that's a whole other conversation, but one thing I will say is what I got there was visitations from previous cave dwellers as well. And the cave really represents the womb, which represents the pre-axial structure of fertility expressions in the history of humanity, right? Right. And that they were superseded previous to Christianity, particularly because of meteor devastations that brought about the study of the stars and the stones, right? And you know, different various expressions like Zeus and, you know, lightning bolt father gods, right, in the sky. And,
right. So the story goes back and goes back and goes back and goes back.
And it's very organic. And that's the other thing that we're not doing in this age is because everything's so hit the nail on the head that we, the storyteller Martin Shaw, who I just went to see, he did a retreat or event on like an intensive event for a weekend. He says, we can't remove the pebbles, the stones out of the shoes of these stories. And part of the problem that I would add is that we expect them to be bloodless, and they're not. Right.
And so when we're scared to hold the discomfort of the blood, we don't get to reclaim the story, right? And we don't get to see, so it's like coming back to us being storyless or having lost our story. when we look at, it's like, what's that process, Alana? I mean, like in that reclamation, what do you think our process is? If the story goes back and goes back and goes back, and it's so nuanced, and there's like, it's not like we can nail on the head, go, okay, well, if I go back to this place in Scotland where my ancestors are, I'm going to, or came from, I'm going to somehow feel like I've reclaimed my story. Or if I learn my native tongue, it just feels like it's bigger than that.
It is bigger than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I've discovered through the process of, and I knew that it was bigger than that. And then you go through the process of it, and then you see that part of what is being asked of us, because, the reason why this is all open right now, you're talking about spirituality and ancestral healing, like just the list goes on. We're in a transition period in the world.
Yeah.
And the mental rational age is coming to a close. The age of enlightenment is coming to a close. And how we come to a close with it, and how we move into the next story, the next expression, is critical. Because the reason why the magic realm is open to us right now, the magic age, the pre-axial expressions, and the mythopoetic,
The crystals,
all of it,
yes.
all of that. The reason why that's open right now is because we're at an end of an age. So all of them are hopping. All of them are open. It feels confusing. It feels sometimes like, whoa, like there's a lot going on here right now.
Yeah.
Right.
Feels mucky, feels uncomfortable.
Yeah. And so what I got when I was sitting in that cave is how we supersede the mental rational age is going to determine a hell of a lot as to how we move into the future. And that we're actually, we have agency in regard to this, in regard to evolution.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
And so if we were to think about that next place that we're going, and we've spoken about this over tea, you've spoken to this like culmination of all of it, right? That it's not like going, it's not this going back. It's not going back to the magic realm. It's not just having the rational enlightenment state. What was the other one? There's
Mythic.
The mythic.
The mythic.
The mythic. It's all of it together.
Yeah, and that was, I mean...
That's nuance.
Again, I wouldn't recommend this book for everybody because it's like this. But it's, one of my teachers, Cynthia Bourgeot, got into this book, and at first I didn't trust it. Now, there's talk about trust, right?
Yeah.
I have had to train myself. I've retrained myself to trust. We're in an age where we're trained to be suspicious.
Yes.
And so the work of Jean Gebser, it's a book called The Ever-Present Origin, and it is massive. Like it's just, but there's, it is the book that guided me through the process of making this folk opera. And the folk opera is not inaccessible. Like it's a totally accessible experience.
It's beautiful.
That's also the process of being an artist, is that you can work with mediums that have this root system, right? But you can still access it and then be influenced in some ways, but you don't have to necessarily read this massive book, right? To get what, to feel like the almost a resonance.
Yes.
Like a sonic or, the way sound bowls will like communicate with different aspects of your body. This can do that without you having to, I have an entire library that prepared me, plus travel, that prepared me to make this album. But that's part of the job of an artist, is you do that work. You do you go the distance, really. And part of that is to stay in this uncomfortable place long enough and not expect it to come quickly, and that you're toiling almost for to be of service in that way.
Oh, Yes, and honestly, Alana, like that has been one of the ways that you've inspired me so deeply as an artist. Exactly what you just said, like this toiling, this not pushing, like allowing something to be birthed, to be gestated in gestation
Yes.
for as long as it needs to be. You know, your ability and capacity to, you know, study. And I wonder, you know, when you think about the discomfort and the creation that comes, you know, from that place. With the folk opera, can you speak to more of like the discomfort that birthed? Was it the loss of story? Was it, you know, what were the discomforts that really birthed this beautiful masterpiece that you're releasing?
Well, in part, it's because we're in a dying age that I was like, and because we're in a dying age and everything is open, and we have an elephant in the room in the West. Yeah. We have, like I mentioned, the Benedictine tradition, which is, you know, over 1,600 years old, and in very good ways influenced really beautiful things in the world. The Franciscan tradition influenced extraordinary things in the world, the ways in which people lived. But we're at a time also where we have an overload, I think, in our bodies of trauma that, like, collective, like our stories are traumatic, right? Like this big story is as well, because and I think I've talked to you about it. There's a woman that did a study on participation induced trauma. So when you're adjacent to a story and you have the face of the colonizer, like when someone sees you and you're, you know, living in a place where this story has happened, right? And is still ongoing in terms of how it all, of promises and agreements and like on a political level, like between our, like the Corporation of Canada and sovereign nations in this country, right?
Yeah.
And how we don't understand that that's really what it is, like that there's agreements that are made and that not everybody sees themselves as a Canadian person.
Right.
And some people do and some people don't. And that it's this, we're in a story and it's ongoing.
Yes.
And so that was part of it. And also seeing how, again, people coming from, particularly from European descent, that intuit that they have a spiritual side to themselves, and will engage with anything but, like the last 1,800 years, or even like you go back far enough and you almost, not everybody's a historian, like not everybody's like, but we need historians, like really go, like not just working with whatever curriculum is telling you that this or that, you know, we need storytellers, we need novelists, we need different aspects. Like picture what it's like in the 1st century in Britain when Rome is invading. Crucifixions are happening. Like when there are, like, I don't know how many tribes, there are like a large number of tribes living on this island, you know, with different languages and borders and customs, and then Rome is not Catholic Rome. That happens 400 years later, you know, or 350 years later. So you start to, like, just even that alone, and then go back far enough to, well, how did the city of Rome like come to be? Like just, and you get into this organic process of trying not, you almost have to put on like the hat of a time traveling diplomat, like, or like, how would you, to right now, say you're going to a country you've never been there, and they have very different customs than you do, very different ways of seeing the world. Would you go in there and tell them what's what? Would you go in there and say like, oh, no, like, or would you be curious? Would you try and be respectful
Right.
around the table. What are the table customs? The way I approach the research is I literally I'm a curious time traveler, and I don't impose my modernity onto a time and a place that is very, very different. So
Right.
really practicing what Dr. Martin Shaw says, don't remove the stones from the shoe of the story. And this, and what I said is, this is not a bloodless world.
Right.
So that even just time travel and travel itself is not comfortable.
Right.
It's a challenge for you to not expect the entire world to conform to what you think is the way things should be.
Right. Well, and so with the folk opera, it's like the layers are just so profound, so this is like your experience.
Yeah.
This is our experience, this time traveling. So it's both like the individual and the collective.
Yeah, it is. It's an example of maybe how to you could use it almost as a way to metabolize some of this.
Yeah.
It's like I had to do a personal process, but then I also went into I'm doing this collectively.
Yes.
This isn't like me, myself, and me narcissistic album. It's not my first album.
No.
Right.
Right. It's not. This is like, it's just so deeply layered. And it's a journey too, right? So when we look at the folk opera, it's like, it's a journey.
It is.
Yeah.
And it is linear in a way.
Right.
It doesn't have to be linear, but I did it in a linear,
Yeah.
a story arc kind of way that harkens back to my ancestors that predate the Druidic time. It begins in a primordial place. It does, and honors all of it, and names truths, particularly because I have chosen to consciously remain a daughter of the Christian household. I tell truths about what that organization or what the state expressions or the people, the way it's been abused and misused. I tell a story inside the folk opera. I had a dream, and I believe it was a real ancestor that one of my, and it doesn't surprise me, that one of my grandmothers or great aunties or somebody, or maybe me in another life, I don't know, was burned at the stake up in Scotland somewhere, and during the witch hunt era. And I tell the story in the song "Obedient Daughter." It's her voice, right? And I tell that story, but I do it in such a way I feel it's integrative. And it's not imposing a modern integration. It's so subtle. It's just very, very subtle.
Well, I guess people have to listen to it.
Yeah.
And you're releasing it song by song. You've released one of the songs?
Well, I have, but it's only been in the last week where I've realized I'm going to be releasing this under a different name.
Right.
So it's all being that will be re-released.
Okay.
And the whole album it comes out in November, in early November, after
Okay.
All Hallows, after Samhain.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And, I love how you really are a vessel to, the flow of what comes up, like this, knowing that's come up about the want and need to release it under a different name and being able to shapeshift and do what you need to do what's best for the work.
That's right. It's the delivery systems. It's in service to them. So it's like a bit of an alter ego as well. And that helps with, it's not an ego so much as a system to let it flow, to let it flow through. So
Right. So we can get out of some of the constructs. Like having an alter ego can help with like any constrictions we have within ourselves and in the release or in the release of the work. Okay. And so, and you're doing videos. So you're like, the other thing that you're doing with this is that you are also like, you're behind all of it. Yeah. Which is really special. And I want to name that, if we talk about standing in, what it is you're doing, not only do you have 25 years of being a songwriter, but what feels really unique to you, or what I can see in you and your way that you do your work, like you truly are a shapeshifter. You truly are a Renaissance woman in how you approach your art, from the study, and like, those listening can just hear, like you deeply study the things that you are working with and creating the threads in which you're tying together in your creations. But you also do production.
yeah.
Yeah. All the pre-production as well as like...
Yeah, I produce the music. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm the producer. And I think that's also, again, it's like the entrainment of not standing in what you've earned.
Right.
And especially for me, it feels like as a woman, to even adopt a little bit of that swagger around knowing what you've earned. But I do it, you can do it in a way that's not like a kind of a cheap humility, but like a quiet swagger of knowing what you've earned, of knowing like, I am a music producer and I'm good. Like to say that, like that's empowering.
It's important and empowering.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember I released this song at New Year's. I put music to Alfred Lord Tennyson's Ring Out Wild Bells, which was a Christmas when he wrote it for Christmas, but it gets used for New Year's. And I produced the video and played all this, like in that particular one, I played all the instruments and produced it, and it went viral, right? And I had quite a number of people commenting saying, wow, whoever was whoever produced that, send him my kudos, like, and there's like a part of me again that's like exercising, walking in amnesty, like offering, not imprisoning, like, because that feels like an imprisoning thing, that like unconscious, send him my, kudos for like what he did, And so I did respond to some of them, and I just said, thanks. I was the one who did that. But I have to hold it in a different way, or I just am like, it gets to me like that. I just like get so feisty about it, and that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But at a certain point, it takes up too much of my time.
Right.
And at a certain point, it energetically, like, I'm a finite person like everybody. So that energy that's going over there, I could use that to change the world. Right. I could use that to make some, instead of like getting worried about some old unconscious thing. Like, I know I did it. Right. And if the more you know,
that's right. Yeah. And the more you know that, and the more you actually embody that within yourself and remind yourself that you did it and really own it, I just feel like that stuff stings less. At least that's in my experience, that when I get really testy about that and I look inside, it's like, because I'm not actually acknowledging in myself. I'm not standing in it. I'm not walking in, my capacity and what I'm doing.
Or like a state of authority, like not holding ourselves with a healthy authority, which like, is it that again, it's like it's all in development all the time. Yeah. And it's something to give ourselves permission to do. And it's not, I have something to prove. It's more like, This is what I do.
That's right. That's right. And that is, you know, for me, having us being new friends, that's definitely how I've received you. And as another artist receiving you, that's been, again, so inspiring for me to witness you do that, in the fact that, like, it's actually pushed me to take my art way more seriously, Alana. And like, I've known you for what, a year? But as I kind of witness you standing your authority and continue to make your art in this way outside of the system, which I never got a chance to go into the system to do it. And that's always been a grieving place for me. But our relationship has actually provided me with a lot of closure in that, because we've had conversations and I'm like, okay, well, I mean, here I am. And so I can create right now. There's no limitations to doing that, and watching you be the Renaissance woman, and, you know, me doing that off the side of my desk as well, production and video and things like that. But seeing you fully dive in and have your family fully dive in, and seeing, you know, what you can do with that, what you're creating with that, and the authority that you hold in your capacity to create and access the nuance and the creative consciousness, and to just know it with no apology, that this is what needs to happen, and that this is your life's work, and this is your life's path, and that there's no other option for you.
Yeah, you're right.
There isn't, you know, you'll be sick if you don't.
That's right. Yeah. And what makes me so excited is that the more an artist steps, like the more veteran artists step into their authority, and also, but in a generative way. Like, I'm stepping into this authority because if I do, I don't even have a clue what the ramifications, in a good way, like what the ripple effect of that is going to be, because we all, it's all hands on deck here.
That's right.
Right now in this time, everybody, right?
Yeah.
So for me to hear that it's inspiring it's like half the reason. Right? So because you can only talk about it so much, and then you actually have to do it.
Right.
And the doing it is really the ripple effect on the fact that the arts and culture state of consciousness, shall we say, is at risk right now. And it is one of the greatest channels to the unseen, to the, that we have. It's not the only. We have ritual space, we have prayer, but I would say again, it's the imagination, it's the imaginal that is at risk. So, and I say imagination and imaginal as two separate, but that's narrowing as we supersede the negative shit that we know is part of the deal of the age of enlightenment, and that really the age of like the patriarchy, of uber rational, like we're just these like we're just dead from the neck down kind of thing, and just like we carry our big brains around and that's it. Well, part of the reason why that expressed itself in that way is because it had superseded the mythic, and the mythic had superseded the so if you look back, each one was superseded for organic reasons, like very organic reaction, kind of a reaction to something that wasn't quite, and also through that whole time there was like an evolving states of consciousness inside of us, right? And so there's nothing wrong with the fact that you have a university education. There's nothing, like when we look, it's important. So I think that if we supersede this with utter irrationality, right? Where, little Winston in 1984, George Orwell is writing, with like a sort of glossed over eyes, 2 + 2 = 5, if we supersede it in that uber, like irrational.
Dissociated.
Yeah, dissociated way that's programmed, you know,
Right.
this, then we're going to find, like, historically, they'll look back and they'll go, whoa, boy, did they ever, like, the same thing will happen, right? Some other form of expression. But where we're at right now is that Mama Earth, right, is reaching this, like, we're at a very important time for the way we see the world, the way we love the world, and I would say the stories, just to maybe close, is that I think any time throughout history, when you see people, like humans or civilizations, stop believing in themselves, when they don't believe this, they don't, you know, and when you start to see this sort of like false humility around, like, oh, humans are just a cancer, like, just rid the world of, you know, like, it's better that we're just gone, like, oh, you know, this whole, what are we passing on to our children? You're a cancer? Like, are you kidding? Like, we have to do better than that.
That's right.
And the only way I think we can do better than that, and I'm not a fundamentalist about anything else other than we need imagination.
Yes.
That's what we need to be able to do better than that.
That's right. Because it has to be something other than this.
It can't be that false, like,
No.
false humility, like, you know, the sort of silver fox in the ponytail that gets up there at their, like, 9 PhDs that says, yeah, we're a cancer. But, like, okay, so are you going to be the one that, like, leaves first? Like, how do we get more creative?
Right.
Like, about
what's
this?
next? You know, it's like, what if it's not this, and we're evolving into something other than. The only way to do that, that's not dissociative, is to imagine something that hasn't been imagined yet.
Yeah, and be in our bodies when
That's
we
right.
do it.
An embodiment and an emotive imagining, right? And a creative imagining. And that's where, you know, that's so beautiful. And that is exactly where we're at. And we need art, and we need the arts and culture, and we need to feel the discomfort for, you know, you don't birth anything unless you're in discomfort, right?
And trusting our past, trusting what has gone before. And that does not mean that we don't look at the systems of injustice in the world,
right?
But we have to look at things differently, because the way it's being done right now is literally closing the gap on imagination.
Yeah, we have to hold it all. Coming back to the nuance, we have to hold the injustice and the beauty, the wisdom and the pain, the blood and the love. You know, it's like, you're brilliant, Alana. I'm so grateful that we've met, and that, you know, the world needs your art. And so if people want to stay connected with you about the folk opera, about your other work, I mean, where can they find you?
So there's 2 websites now.
Okay.
MEDIATRIX.club is where you can come and experience this this work. I feel belongs in this narrowing place that, or like the arts and culture public square.
Yeah.
And then for people who want to go deeper into the, I would say it's like the Western mystery tradition and Christian mysticism, and that story of the lineage that I stand in, then Alana Levandoski is still going to be making. I have a whole, like, entire album of chants that no one's ever heard, that will be in that kind of genre, and teachings that are inside of that genre as well. And so it's like, it's both, and I never wanted, ever, in all the times that I was in the last 10 years of everything that I've made, I never wanted anyone to think that I was making it because I had an agenda. I'm not telling people that they have to convert to any one religion or any. what I would say is I think we need to be open to seeing all of these expressions that have come through the human imagination as a piece to the puzzle.
Right.
And if we take one out, it will be the elephant in the room.
Right.
And it will always be there. And if we don't deal with it, I think that's how egregores come to pass. And you see, how am I responsible for some of this Christian nationalism that we're seeing, and supremacy and everything else? Because nothing ever goes away. You cannot exile anything. We belong here. My good friend Colleen, an Indigenous teacher of mine, says, no one's left out of the circle. And when we put people when we exile, it mutates in the shadows.
Right.
And
Always.
What part of ourselves
That's
have
right.
we exiled and is mutating that we're just really not open to touching? So again, it's like none of this that I made is saying, oh, you need to convert to something, but I think we need to start to be open to our history.
That's right. Thank you, Alana. And I'll put all of this in the show notes, and maybe even the book that you spoke about that, is a deep dive.
It's called Ever-Present Origin.
Yeah, Ever-Present Origin. And anything else that we want to put there for you guys to connect with Alana or her work.
All the social media. And
all the social media,
all
your
that.
Substack, your
Spotify,
all those things. So if you have threads that you're feeling really like you want to follow, check out the show notes. Thank you so much for being here, Alana.
Thank you for inviting me, Deandra.
You're welcome. I feel like I need to have like 6 more podcasts with you to ask all the questions, but thank you for getting us started, let's say, and I hope to have you on again.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.